The Mysterious Disappearance. The Case of Olya Lavrentyeva. A little girl named Olya cautiously approached a massive wardrobe. A heavy chair propped up the door. Straining, she pulled the chair away, then pressed her ear against the door, holding her breath as she listened. Silence reigned inside the wardrobe. After a moment's hesitation, she grabbed the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, and Olya's eyes widened in horror. 2009, Marshansk, Tambov region. A patrol car slowly cruised down one of the city's streets. The officers were in no hurry. It had been a quiet shift with no incidents or rowdy drunks. Suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes. At a bus stop, a little girl was sobbing uncontrollably. She was dressed in old, dirty clothes with battered boots that had half-torn soles. Was she astray? The shivering child was taken to the city orphanage, where she revealed her name. Olya. But who was Olya? Where were her parents? How did she end up alone on the street? Despite her disheveled appearance, she didn't seem like a typical vagrant. Yet her old clothes, dirty hair, and unkempt nails raised many questions. Usually, children who end up in orphanages come from troubled families, taken by child protection services during inspections or raids. However, if a child is in danger, they can also seek refuge in an orphanage on their own. No child is ever turned away. There, they stay until their future is determined, typically being placed in boarding schools or foster care. Rarely do parents reclaim them. But no one came looking for Olya. She obstinately remained silent, initially only revealing her age, 9 years old. Days passed, and gradually the reclusive girl opened up to the caring staff, finally revealing that she lived alone at home. The orphanage managed to uncover her last name, Lavrentyeva, and the number of the school she attended. Teachers noted that they had long been concerned about Olya's strange appearance. Worn-out shoes, mismatched and dirty clothes. Several teachers had visited her home, but there were no parents around. Concerned about Olya's family, the orphanage staff contacted the police. Strangely, according to the local police officer, the Lavrentyev family was a well-off household of retired military personnel. They had moved from the city of Volsk in the Saratov region and received a 3-room apartment in Marshansk. The family lived harmoniously with their 3 children. But where had everyone gone? No one answered the doorbell, neither the head of the family, Mikhail Vasilyevich, nor his wife, Victoria. What had happened to this family? Why was 9-year-old Olya living entirely alone? Even curious neighbors couldn't explain what had occurred. Olya's parents were pensioners. Had something happened to them? An accident? A sudden illness? Hospitals and morgues were checked, but there were no traces of them. But where were Olya's older brothers? They were also registered at the now empty apartment. It seemed impossible that the entire family could vanish without a trace. Eventually, it was discovered that Olya's older brother, Vyacheslav, had a wife named Yulia. The investigators went to her home. Yulia explained that her husband Vyacheslav and his brother Evgeny were in Moscow for work. She suggested that their parents might also be in Moscow. This was shocking. Could the adults have gone to work in Moscow and left a 9-year-old child alone? However, according to the neighbors, this was unlikely. The family was very close-knit, often vacationing together without any apparent conflicts. But soon after, the investigators received another call from the orphanage. The caretakers reported that Olya had been sharing peculiar information. She claimed her parents had left, but their documents were still at home in the wardrobe in the living room. It became clear that Olya's relatives had disappeared against their will. Something terrible had happened to them. The Marshansk police declared the Lavrentyev family missing nationwide. Photos of the pensioners and their older children, Vyacheslav and Evgeny, appeared in train stations, airports, and bus terminals, but all in vain. No one had seen the missing family members. Then, suddenly, Evgeny resurfaced, alive and well. The 25-year-old was shocked by his family's disappearance, but couldn't provide any clear explanations. He stated that he had been working in Moscow and had no idea where his relatives had gone during his absence. The investigators again visited Yulia, hoping she might remember something. What they found was astonishing. Yulia had already moved into the now empty Lavrentyev apartment and was making herself at home. The investigators were suspicious. Yulia likely knew more than she was letting on and might even be involved in the disappearance of the Lavrentyev family and her husband. However, they couldn't get her to confess. Meanwhile, Olya began speaking openly again. This time, she shared her thoughts on her brother's wife, Yulia. Olya mentioned that her parents did not like Yulia at all. It was decided to place Yulia under discreet surveillance, hoping she might lead them to the missing family members. Julia behaved like any other young mother. She took daily walks with her stroller, stopped by shops along the way, or spent time in the park. Little did she know that the elderly folks on nearby benches, and even the mothers with strollers she met, were actually undercover police officers. Soon their surveillance caught something unusual. At 2:15 p.m., near the city savings bank, Yulia Lavrentyeva met a young man in a padded jacket. They talked for about 5 minutes, with the man constantly looking around. Julia handed him some documents, and he entered the bank. The bank staff didn't pay much attention to this peculiar customer, but they should have. He was quite a sight. Scruffy, unshaven, wearing a beanie pulled low over his eyes and visibly nervous. He handed a savings book through the window, and the cashier quickly counted out the money, 370,000 rubles, which he grabbed with a shaking hand before disappearing. Once outside, he nodded to Julia, who had been waiting, and vanished into the crowd, leaving Julia to walk her stroller in the opposite direction. The police rushed to the bank to learn more about this suspicious man. A report from an undercover officer read, 370,000 rubles were withdrawn from the savings account of pensioner Mikhail Vasilyevich Lavrentyev. The signed receipts were confiscated for handwriting analysis. It was clear that the thief used the pensioner's savings book. Even with his padded jacket and unkempt appearance, he didn't look a day over 35. It was puzzling that the bank staff didn't notice this. Handwriting analysis confirmed that the signature was expertly forged. But who was this mysterious conspirator? And what had happened to the Lavrentyev family? Only Julia could provide answers. When she learned that she had been seen with the suspicious man in the padded jacket, Julia broke down in tears and immediately confessed it was her husband, Vyacheslav Lavrentyev. Yet she insisted he was innocent. He had no idea where his parents had gone. He merely decided to use his father's money while job hunting outside Tambov. After all, the senior Lavrentyevs had been missing for a year. He sold his father's garage and kept the proceeds. Detectives found Vyacheslav's behavior odd. Why steal his father's money if he believed the man would never return? And why hadn't he cared for his younger sister, never visiting her in the orphanage? It seemed Vyacheslav was a cold-hearted narcissist, unconcerned with his family. This made him particularly interesting to the police, who summoned him for questioning. Expecting Vyacheslav to hide or flee, the detectives were surprised when he showed up obediently. They decided to take a risk. "Tell us how you committed the murder," they said. Vyacheslav pondered for a moment and then began writing a full confession. His detailed account stunned the investigators. No one expected this seemingly modest young man to be capable of such a brutal crime. Although his story seemed incredible, Vyacheslav was adamant about his guilt. Overwhelmed with sudden remorse, he couldn't stop himself, finally unleashing the horrifying secret he had carried for a year. He barely slept and drank heavily to forget how he had murdered his parents. Vyacheslav revealed that he buried their bodies in a forest near Marshansk, visiting their graves weekly, which is why he easily found the burial site in the dense woods. A year later, only bones remained of the unfortunate couple. The forensic report stated, the male skull had 2 chop wounds. The female skull bore 7 chop wounds to the face and back of the head. The mother's remains included her favorite nightgown. The father's remains were limited to jeans. Vyacheslav had literally hacked his parents to death. But why had he done it? Why condemn his defenseless parents to such a fate? It all began shortly after Vyacheslav and Julia's wedding. They quickly had a child and moved into the Lavrentyev's apartment, becoming a burden to the elderly couple. The parents disapproved, criticizing their son and daughter-in-law, which led Vyacheslav to conceive a horrendous plan. He kept a small axe at home, waiting for the right moment when his father left for a night shift as a security guard and Julia visited her own parents. Finally, only he, his younger sister Olechka, and their doomed mother remained in the apartment. Vyacheslav recounted that he killed his mother while she prayed. He claimed he saw a photo of his child and wife and believed his mother was cursing them. The loud noise woke Olechka, who trembled with fear as she peered through the keyhole of her room. She witnessed everything her brother did to their mother's body, a traumatic event that scarred her for life. Vyacheslav cleaned up the blood, hid his mother's body in a wardrobe, and locked the room. The next day, unaware of what awaited him, his father went to the garage. A dark twist of fate. In a cruel twist of fate, that very day was Mikhail Vasilievich's birthday. He had planned to celebrate it with his friends and neighbors, but they couldn't make it. As a result, father and son found themselves alone in the garage. No one ever saw the elderly Lavrentyevs again. The son took a plywood box, first placing his mother's body inside, followed by his father's, and drove them into the forest in his father's Volga. Vyacheslav then told acquaintances and neighbors that his parents had gone to Moscow for work. He fabricated stories about occasional phone calls and greetings from them. The neighbors were puzzled. They knew Victoria Pavlovna would never abandon her beloved garden or leave her young daughter behind. The unfortunate little girl was left all alone. Yulia moved into the now vacant apartment with her child, but paid no attention to Olechka. The 9-year-old tried to wash her own clothes and even cooked simple meals as best she could, but she still appeared as a neglected child. Vyacheslav Lavrentyev was sentenced to 17 years in prison. It later came to light that Lavrentyev had attempted suicide while in pre-trial detention. He was saved just in time. Now he has to live with the unbearable burden of guilt, waking up each night drenched in cold sweat from horrific nightmares. But that's another story entirely. To ensure you don't miss our upcoming tales, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave your comments. Your feedback means a lot to me.